Thanks, Leo. This is on, yeah? Yeah. Yes, okay. So, again, we both, Leo and I, had talked to Randy today, and she's very sorry that she can't be here, and asked me to express also to everyone that it's not just it's the long-time solidarity and international work that this union has done, which is so important, and the personal importance that she feels also to this work, in terms of what we in the Jewish world call tikkun olam, repairing the world. She takes that piece very, very seriously, and she sees this as part of it. And the second thing I just want to say, and if you notice, the headline on this was, welcome, come to a different conversation about Israel. As someone who has been very active for longer than Rami was born, has lived.
That's a second joke about my age.
Sorry.
In 10 minutes.
We talked about it over breakfast, so Leo and I are very focused on it. When people feel, when they talk about Israel, or they think about Israel, or they debate about Israel, it's almost never Israel that they're debating about or talking about. It's this mythic Israel, and it's the occupation, it's the fighting between Israel and its neighbors, it's justice for the Palestinians, or depending on your politics, not justice for the Palestinians. I think I've always thought it's very, very important that people understand what's going on in Israel domestically as a real living country, and how important dialogue is, and this is something also Randy wanted me to stress, dialogue between progressives in the United States and Israelis and Palestinians, that this is not to cut off dialogue, to boycott, to, as everybody talks about BDS, is the wrong direction to go in. We need to learn about each other, and we need to build relationships together. So this is a great learning experience about what's going on the ground in Israel in terms of the things that we care about, social justice, the economy, and trying to build a new opposition to the current politics there. And then the final thing I just want to say is, for a lot of people in the world, there was a feeling that the politics in Israel was an outlier for all these decades, that Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a right-wing populist, was particular to Israel. Sadly, we have all now learned he wasn't. They were ahead of the curve. And it's not an accident that he and Donald Trump sit and shake hands in the White House, or that what happened in Italy this week happened, or what's happening in Poland or Hungary or elsewhere in the world is happening. Guatemala, the new best friend of the U.S. The right-wing populist politics that Benjamin Netanyahu is so brilliant at leading is something that we're all facing in the world, and that's something that Rami will talk to us about, and how the work that he's doing in engaging on social justice and economic issues can bring all of us to the next level that we need to get to, both in terms of domestic and then global, and for the Israeli piece, obviously, in reaching out to its neighbors. So Rami, I want to ask you to start, if you could just familiarize people briefly with the workforce structure in Israel. People know historically Israel was a socialist economy. It went through a Thatcherite revolution that took it out of that sphere. Can you talk a little bit about how unions are organizing, the work you do, and what the current economic situation is in Israel?
So first of all, I want to say thank you, Leo, and thank you, Joanne, for this event. And the guy who's sitting over there is like my uncle in the United States. His name is Stuart Davidson, and he's a labor lawyer, a very important labor lawyer from Philly, the guy that is in Israel like 2 or 3 times a year, and is deeply involved, like Joanne, with lots of building relationships with Israelis and Palestinians. So after 4 very complicated days that I had here, I'm not going to elaborate now. I feel home, so it's really great to be here. From the labor movement, from people, the progressive movement in the United States. So thank you. So actually, the funny thing is that our prime minister is considered to be a strong believer in the status quo, in maintaining the occupation when we talk about the situation between Israelis and Palestinians. But on social economic issues, and specifically in the labor market, Benjamin Netanyahu he made a revolution in Israel, right? In the last 10 years, all he's doing is fear politics, is divide and rule, is bringing hatreds between Jews and Arabs, between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, between secular and religious. But on social economic issues in the last 20 years, Netanyahu has completely transformed the social and economic policy in Israel. Israel back in the 70s, back in the 80s, it wasn't a perfect country. We had some problem, but we had a decent welfare state. In terms of both the Gini index, inequality, and poverty rates, Israel was quite a progressive state, of course more progressive than the United States, more progressive than most of the Western world. Even in terms of inequality within Israel, Jews and Arabs, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, upper middle class, and we were a good progressive state. And it's almost a miracle because Israel, was only established in 1948, and it was very, very obvious to the founders of Israel, right, to our grandmother and grandfathers, that Israel will be built according to a social democratic perspective, to a social democratic worldview that said that if we will build a new state, it will be organized in order to create equality between people. So again, like any other welfare state, we had lots of problems, lots of groups were discriminated, but I think that Israel, and it's very important for me to emphasize, Israel in its core, its structure, its health system, its labor market laws, its educational system is a progressive project. Israel was established as a progressive project. I'm a strong believer that Israel has a progressive future. And in terms of what Joanne asked, in terms of labor market policy, Israel went from 70% of workers in Israel were organized in the Histadrut, which was a pre-state institution. It is our largest union. It is still our largest union. So 70% back in the 70s, right? So when people immigrated to Israel, they had social security, they had social rights, they gained fair wages. This is the only way to bring people from Europe and North Africa and Asia and still have some kind of a social cohesion, right? So it was 70% density in the 70s, in the 80s. It dropped to 25%, right? 25% in the last 15 years, and the politician who is most responsible for it is Benjamin Netanyahu. Mass privatization in education, in health. Israel has the largest percentage of contractor workers among OECD countries. So 10% of our labor market is composed of contractor workers. And the narrative of the right, the narrative of the prime minister, until the social protest in 2011, until we progressive Israelis started to organize and to build a good social justice movement, was exactly like all over the world. And this is an important point to emphasize, because Israel is actually very similar to what's happening in different countries. The narrative was we have no alternative. So it's neoliberalism, privatization, and this is number one policy in keeping the Israeli labor market very, very, very weak. And of course, with these conditions, with having strong inequality and poverty, it's also more easy to make his politics of, trying to divide and rule between groups. So still, the biggest labor union in Israel is this pre-state institution, the Histadrut. What has happened in the last 10 years that we have seen a labor revival in Israel. Because of our work, because of the work that is being done in the union that I had the privilege to be one of the founders, and the strong things that are happening in the Histadrut, Israel is the only country besides Belgium in the Western world who has a growing labor movement. Our labor movement has grown quite dramatically in the last decade. And again, this is something that it's important to me to emphasize, because it's not, as Joanne said, it's not this mythical Israel that people on the right or in the extreme left see. It's not only, as you can believe, I'm a strong supporter of a two-state solution. I think that the continuous occupation is the biggest threat, both of Israelis and Palestinians, but this is the real society. People are organizing, Jews and Arabs together, ultra-Orthodox and secular together. the majority of people who are leading this new wave of labor organizing in Israel are women. We have some very impressive joint Jews and Arabs union. So 10 years, we've seen a labor revival in Israel. Now the Central Statistical Board just published a new report saying that after 30 years of decline, the Israeli labor movement is growing.
Rami, I just want to interrupt and ask you, if I were writing about this, I would say we need the local color. Can you take us inside some of your organizing campaigns? Give us some idea about who the people are that you're working with. Just bring us with you onto the ground there of what you're doing.
So in 2007, when we started, we had a labor movement which was quite strong, but because of privatization and because what happened, the labor movement was in a trauma. So it was mainly only public sector workers that were organized. Yeah, clinic personnel in university, security guards, preschool teachers, industries that was being privatized. We have teachers and social workers that are working through outsourcing in Israel, right? So when we
I just want to interrupt there.
sure.
Can you explain the role of Manpower in Israel, Manpower Inc., which is unlike, I think, possibly any other economy. It's the largest employer in Israel.
Yeah,
It's a contractual economy.
Yeah. Again, so it's 10% of the workers in Israel are working through this kind of manpower strategies. Yeah, right. So when we started, it was I remember the first conversation I had. I was a student in Haifa University. I spoke with waiters and security guards and cleaning personnel inside our university. And I told them, listen, we are starting a new union, we can organize. And they were like, what? Organizing in Israel? The labor movement only, it only takes care of the public sector workers. These people have no vision of, had even didn't imagine the fact that they can organize, right? Because so it was mainly in the first years that we started, it was going to the most oppressed group in Israel, both in terms of politics, both in terms of the social infrastructure. The first big union that we established was a union that is composed of preschool teachers. It was an ultra-Orthodox woman from Bnei Brak who is a Likud voter.
I just have to interrupt, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
There's a deal in West Virginia. Randy just messaged. Yeah, so stay tuned. But it was worth her not being here today. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, a good deal. Okay, sorry.
So the first union that we've built was an ultra-Orthodox woman from Bnei Brak, which is an ultra-Orthodox city in Israel. She went to the north to organize preschool Palestinian teachers. It's a union that is composed of 5,000 preschool teachers. The majority is ultra-Orthodox and Palestinians. From the north of the south, the leadership of the union is strong women, again, ultra-Orthodox in Palestine. This is something that the Israeli left never did before, right? The leaders of the social workers union, again, Jews and Arabs. The leaders of we just signed 2 new agreements with 2 major bus companies. The leadership is composed of Palestinians from East Jerusalem, with people who usually vote for the right wing that live in the south of Israel under rockets, right? Like under the missiles of Hamas. So it's unbelievable. It's the first time in our history as a progressive movement that we are organizing these new audiences. And it's extraordinary because I'm a strong, I believe that the only field that we as leftists, we as a progressive movement in Israel can win. Not one time. We can win one time, after the prime minister will... I have a videotape. Well, I don't mind saying it, but after the prime minister will be either in jail or in his house. I'm not going to say what I prefer, but anyway. So after this is done, right? After we're done, we can win one time. But in order for the Israel progressive movement to be in power, we need to reach out to new audiences. Not just speaking about it, not just posting message. We need to be engaged with communities and people. That are currently the place that they are organizing is the labor movement, right? So the challenge is to make is to try to put the labor movement revival in Israel to the next stage. Making people not only believe in the work that we do as labor organizers, but also believe that the progressive movement as a whole can work for them. This is the challenge. But in terms of social successes, the labor movement in Israel in the last decade increased the minimum wage 6 times, installed a compulsory pension act, the social protest in 2011, which was a great success. With the strength of the labor movement, we expanded the Free Education Act to include all children above the age of 3. It used to be only above the age of 5, right? So it's saving my family. It's saving other families about $800 a month. So in terms of social economic achievement, I think that the Israeli left in the last decade, they made enormous achievements. Right. I'm not objective, but I think, this is what we've done.
And can you talk to us a little bit about the age range of activists in Israel? You're young, and you have, we hope, a very bright future ahead of you. We are, there's a lot of debating about the role of millennials, the people giving up on politics. Yeah. Talk about your generation a little bit and what's going on in Israel.
So what actually happened is that my generation found a common language with his grandmother and grandfather and was very upset. We were very upset on our parents. Why? Because we, again, Israel was established as a welfare state. And after long years of privatization, the normal conversation in Friday dinners in Israel of young progressive who are leading this new wave of social justice and peace movement was, we told our parents, you gave up, right? You gave up. You gave up on the social infrastructure of Israel. You again, it's like we love our parents, right? But it's a strong political debate that we have. So if you take people like me and like Stav Shafir and like other friends that we have in the labor in Meretz, we felt that the narrative, the arguments that our parents used as Israeli leftists for the last 30 years was, after we'll make peace with the Palestinians, which again, according to my views, is the most important thing that Israel needs to do. After, the common argument was, we will make peace, then we will take care of social problems. We will make peace, then we maybe try to tackle inequality and poverty and the condition of low-wage workers. So this narrative has failed, right? This narrative has failed because although peace and ending the occupation is the most important thing that we need to do, in the last 25 years, and again, this is something that is not only said by me, but I think most of a progressive generation, like Israel millennials say, well, when we did these peace talks, we neglected the Israeli society, right? So the source of alienation, how I believe, the source of alienation of the majority of center-right voters in Israel, who are not bad people. Those are people who supported the peace between Israel and Egypt. Those are people who had vast majority in the peace talks in Oslo between Yitzhak Rabin government and the Palestinians. But they lost hope in the Israeli left, not because they're racist, not because they hate Palestinians, but because they felt that the left is not taking care. Again, it's not so different to what's happening here and all over the world, right? So our argument not against, but in all the talks that we have, I can personally talk about my personal experience with my mother, that okay, you were progressive on peace issues. This is of course very, very important, but you neglected the social struggle, the social infrastructure of Israel, and in the same time that the previous generation said we will make peace and after peace we will take care about social issues, the right has won the hearts and minds of working class in Israel, right? So this is our challenge. Our challenge is to both grow a group a movement that can talk about how ending the occupation is a very important thing that we should do, and in the same time, our work must be rooted in communities, in the labor market, with the work with regular Israelis, with low-wage income workers that our movement in the past has neglected. So this is a challenge that I see.
So when I was in Israel for the last election, and it was very striking to just pick up on what Rami was saying. There was a plant that was closing in the south of Israel, which is the poorer part of the country. The workers were all Likud members, the leadership of the union. They were all Likud members. In Israel, similar to most of the European countries, the unions, the Histadrut, the labor union, is organized with political parties inside, not like in this country. The Likud members and the heads of the union sat there ripping up their their membership cards in the Likud because of the plant closing down and because of the Israeli government not doing anything to support them. And that made the progressive camp think they were on their way to victory. And of course, lo and behold, after the votes were counted, those very same Likud members who ripped up their Likud party membership from the closed plant that the government was doing nothing for, voted for the Likud. So the entrenched, what I would call ethnic politics, what in Israelis call tribalism in Israel, the dislike, the distrust of progressives is so deep and so strong. So I want to ask you, there's going to be a new election at some point, maybe sooner than a lot of progressives in Israel want there to be. Because there's talk now of the prime minister forcing elections to strengthen his hand as he's going into these very serious investigations against him. Let me ask you, Rami, put yourself, again, bring us there. Go down to Beersheba, to Ofakim, to one of the poorer towns in the south of Israel, and sit with those workers. And I mean, I'm almost tempted to be a little role-playing here, like pushing back. But tell us what you say when you get into these conversations, how you get, for the next election, how are these people going to both tear up their Likud cards and also vote for their own self-interest and not against their self-interest?
I think that the most important thing to say is that in Israel, people are afraid. And you can't do politics or social activism or do something in Israel without understanding that people has very good reasons to be afraid. If we dismiss it, if we say, well, you're afraid because you're being manipulated by the Israeli right-wing government, you don't have any reasons to be afraid, then they will keep on telling stories about how their sons and daughters and families were being murdered in terror. I was in the number 5 bus that we had one of the most horrible terror attacks in Israel during the 90s were in the middle of Dizengoff Street, which is one of the central streets in Tel Aviv. Many people died. I was 10 years old and I was in the bus. I was in the bus behind the bus that was. And I remember coming back home and I remember my mother looked at me. Well, I'm afraid. When I'm driving, when I'm in bus in Tel Aviv, I'm afraid. Does that mean that this the fact that in Israel people in Ofakim and Beersheba and in Tel Aviv are afraid, does that justify the policy of the Israeli government? Absolutely not. But if we want to change Israel, if we want to change the situation between Israel and Palestine, we must have empathy towards the fact that people have very good reasons to be afraid, right? So what I would say is that the right-wing government didn't achieve more security for them and their children in the last 10 years, right? And the fact that the international community is so, even our strongest, besides Donald Trump, but even our best friends doesn't support the settlements. And the fact that Israel is moved from being a very popular state all over the world when it was established and during Rabin's time, and even in the good government that we have in 2005 and 2006, to this kind of point that when people want to look for people that will talk for Israel, most of the countries are not really democratic countries that are speaking for our government. This is something that we need to be worried about. And the fact that under Likud government, inequality, poverty, the condition of Israeli workers is so bad, and people don't have security in terms of their kids going to the army that are not secure, and in terms of their social security that is being damaged every day by the right-wing government. Yeah, so we can use all this argument, but the most important thing that we need to understand, and I know that I wish that people that cared so much about Israel and Palestine will also understand that first we have it's a long journey. And second, that we should understand that the people that are not voting for us are afraid.
I want to ask you two legal questions about laws. One has nothing to do with this conversation per se, but there's been a lot of, I would be remiss being in in the teachers union where teachers and students were both shot at and killed so tragically in Parkland a few weeks ago. The right wing in the United States is using, and the gun lobby is using Israel as a model, saying that everyone in Israel has guns and it's all fine. Can you?
Here, by the way.
I think it would be important for people to hear from you how strict the gun laws are in Israel and how fallacious that claim is. That's one thing, and I just want to put out, you can figure out how to do a segue with this. But one of the things that in this country we're trying to figure out how to fight back, obviously, and I think it would be interesting for people to hear about laws around labor law organizing in Israel, the labor court system that you have, that, as Rami said, there's a holdover from when Israel was a progressive economy, that there's some things in the Israeli economy that we would die for here to have, and it would be interesting for people to hear that as they think about models for how to do organizing, especially with all the attacks now on the public sector workers here.
So in Israel, it's impossible, okay, for anyone to have a gun if it's not for clear security reasons. So if I'm living in a kibbutz in the north and I have a very strong military background, I can be a part of a group that its role is to safeguard the kibbutz at night, and then I can have a gun. Okay, but if you don't have strong military background, and if you don't live in a far city or a far kibbutz or a far in the north of this or in the south, it's impossible for anyone to have. I never saw a gun outside the army. I have lots of friends that saw very high places in the army. No one goes with the gun. Okay, so that's number.
In fact, when you leave, a lot of the soldiers leave the army in the weekend.
They don't.
You have to unlock. You have to lock your gun. You have to.
Yeah,
there's a whole process, or you get thrown out of the army.
And the soldiers hate their gun. You know, all they want to do is to have their gun in the military. You know, they don't want to walk around in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem with guns. So that's I'm following this debate. And it's, first of all, it's awful, you know, because it's really like I have so much solidarity with the usually the relationships between progressive in the United States and Israel are like U.S. progressive express their solidarity with progressive in Israel. Now I think that under Netanyahu regime and under Trump regime, you know, it's more mutual now, right? Like, so first of all, in Israel, it's a debate that we don't have. We do have some politicians that, because of the strong engagement that the Republican right in Israel has in Israel, no, so you should know. You can ask my friend Maya, who is sitting here, who just wrote a very impressive research about it, about how the involvement of the far conservative right is building the infrastructure, the think tank, social organization of the religious right in Israel. So we do have some politicians in right who are trying to bring the conservative party to Israel, who are saying it's only the first step, you know, that people should have guns, some stupid arguments against abortions. So we do have some kind of it in Israel, but it's not, even the Israeli right, which is, I disagree with everything that it doesn't have this kind of libertarian argument that the Tea Party and some elements in the Republican Party in the United States have. So this is the first thing, right? We don't have it. We have a crazy right in so many other elements, but not on guns, right? The second thing is that we have a great luck to be every time. What my institution does is we have lots of training and educational programs for students, for labor leaders, for community leaders. And what we talked about is how lucky we are to be living in a state that its social infrastructure has been shaped in very a progressive way, right? So the legal system. So in Israel, we have a new law now that it's illegal for the management to interfere with organizing processes that are happening. It's illegal. So if, for instance, Joan is my boss, so that is kind of true, I can say. So if for instance, Joan is my boss, okay, and I'm organizing, she can't come to me and say, listen, Rami, maybe you should reconsider because, we can raise your salary. It's illegal since 2013, since the mass organizing of the cell phone companies in the Histadrut, which was impressive. They are the first and not last cell phone companies that have a collective agreement. We have 5 more, and 3 high-tech companies and 4 insurance companies now in Israel that mostly the Histadrut is organizing, which is the largest union in Israel. It's illegal for the management to interfere, right? So also regarding pension, regarding free education. 3 years ago, we stopped a very aggressive attempt from the side of the right-wing government to install private arrangements within public hospitals. Now, so in Israel, you can't pay for a surgery. It's impossible. You get it for free. And the right-wing government tried to do is to make this all kind of a privatization arrangements within public hospital, and we prevented it because we made lots of protests and because we made lots of advocacy about it.
Could you talk, just to add to that, what we call in this country card check, of what happens when workers organize inside and what the percentage is, what happens, what's the process, and also about the labor court system, which is completely unheard of here, and questions around arbitration.
Sure. Yeah. So we only have to get a third of the workers signing forms, sending to the management, and if the forms are correct, the management must negotiation with the workers. Mass negotiation with the workers. So the management has. So when we first started to build new unions, which was like a shock in Israel, most of the management will try to interfere. Since I would say in the last 4 years, what usually happened is that when we get a third of the workers sign cards, the management must negotiate it. The legal system, the court is very sympathetic towards you. I can think of maybe one occasion that the court said that the organizing process was not good. In all other cases, the court usually enforce the management to negotiate with the workers.
And there is a whole separate court system called the labor courts,
exactly.
where the judges are there to adjudicate labor issues, and they almost always sign with the workers. Yeah. I think we're going to open it. I'm going to, Leo, give you my microphone, open it to some questions.
Okay, so we're interested in some dialogue. Let me just say on this last thing, and then I'm going to recognize Phil, who I think also has a question on this. The problem in the United States is not just that our labor law is very weak. The problem is that what's there is very poorly enforced. So in theory, no one should ever be fired for organizing a union. It's a hell of a job to actually vindicate that. So it strikes me that what's interesting about Israel is not only that the law is strong, but it is actually enforced.